What is going on, guys? Lurking here from Mobalytics, and today we're going to be going over the patch notes for Season 7. This is after the PTR. Things aren't looking too shabby, you know? We got a lot. We actually did got a lot of damage. There's a lot of quality of life stuff. There's a few really cool things, such as changes to Frost Nova, some bug fixes to the Ball Lightning uniques, to splintering scaling, some changes to Searing Heat and Icefall that were really great. So let's get into it. I'm optimistic. I'm going into this season like this dumb dog. All right, so skill changes. Ice Shard. Ice Shards inherently had a 25% damage to frozen enemies bonus that just came with the skill. It's now 50%, so that's a 20% buff to Ice Shards when it's mobbing. It's pretty large. Mystical, I've been saying this for a long time, but Mystical Frost Nova, the hardcast and the enchant now have value because Mystical Frost Nova, the one we always use, makes enemies vulnerable and they take 15% more damage. This is 8 seconds on bosses, so having Frost Nova on the skill bar with huge Frost Nova size has value now, and taking the enchant, with Ice Blades, Ice Blades are chopping, making a bunch of Frost Novas go around. There's, and there's room for some cool builds now with, say, like Frost Burns, Frost Nova enchant, and Ice Heart Brace. You can have some fun with it. Invoked Ice Blades. It always used to give Ice Blades 10% attack speed. It now gives you and your Ice Blades 10% attack speed. The biggest question is, which attack speed cap is this going to be? If it's cap 2, it's definitely going to have some play, but I don't know if it's going to usurp Summoned Ice Blades, which reduces all your cooldowns. We'll see. Supreme Deep Freeze, it got buffs despite this small little nerf here where its scaling got dropped from 40 to 30%. It's just to bring it in line with some other ultimate scaling, etc. So what's cool now is, in the past, if you canceled Deep Freeze early, you didn't get that final explosion damage, which is the bulk of its damage. And it only applied vulnerable at the end, so you'd make enemies vulnerable, you'd go into Deep Freeze, and by the time you got after the 4 seconds, the enemies wouldn't be vulnerable anymore, so you wouldn't get all that vulnerable damage you spec'd into for it. So now the initial hit makes enemies vulnerable for 5 seconds, and the final explosion damage now happens if you cancel early. It's still going to reset all your non-ult cooldowns, and biggest one here, you're going to get 25% cold damage for 5 seconds after. So having good uptime on your Deep Freeze is going to be important. And hopefully this works with canceling early, so you just be able to like double pop, reset everything, and then go about your day, get your damage. Inferno still has the 50% damage. Nothing really changed. It's just now enemies within Inferno are now continually made vulnerable. They were just vulnerable. There may have been some co-op issues with other classes. Maybe their exploit glyph taking away the vulnerable, or Spiritborn has that key passive that takes away vulnerable and it gets a bunch of vulnerable damage, but that doesn't really change anything. There were some really big passive changes. So Permafrost used to be 5% frost skill damage to elites. It's now 6% all damage for having one frost skill on the action bar. It doesn't scale per frost skill. It's just 6%. And Inner Flames got buffed from 4 to 6%. So now it's just 6% all damage while healthy. So these are on the same level as Glass Cannon now, but they just come with no downsides. So really good amulet this season could just look like Intelligence, Permafrost, and Inner Flames. Who would have thought? Elemental Synergies is the same as it was in the past, but there's a new caveat with it. It previously and is now 1% damage per element on the skill bar. You saw 8 to 12, 16% damage out of this if you had 4 ranks in it with Shroud, yada yada. But the math now works. Basically, let's see. The math is now, if you have 4 ranks in it and you have 6 skills on the bar, that's 24. You times it by 2 because it's doubled. I should probably mention that. It's doubling if you have all of the same skills on the bar. It now goes to 48%. I'm getting confused by my own writing. If you build, so right now, if you build normally, you have a 75% Tel Rasha, and you have like 12% from the passive. That's like double damage. And then if you do a 1 element meme build without Tel Rasha, you have a 35% aspect that goes there, and then it gives 48% damage. It's double damage. So it's viable, but it sounds cumbersome. And if you were to run a setup like this would probably be a viable setup for it. Like Ice Shards is your main skill. You cast Blizzard to freeze enemies and lower your mana cost during an active Blizzard, etc., etc. And if you were to run Tal Rasha with it, you could still get 2 stacks because you would have your teleport evade, and then maybe even Rakanoths would give you that 3rd stack. So it could be really strong, but it's just if you want to give up Flame Shield on like a Frost build. I'm gonna go next. It's an option, but I don't know if I'll spec into it. Asus Ferocity, the direct damage fire key passive, it was buffed from 25% to 50%. That's pretty strong. I still see Asus Ferocity as a leveling / mid-game option for direct damage fire builds, mainly Fireball and Meteor, to use the Ancient Flame aspect to bolster their attack speed prior to getting Starless Skies. That's mainly for Fireball. So I still think you're going to shift to Enlightenment later because it's simply just more damage. But if you like Asus Ferocity and Ancient Flame just as your attack speed, and you're unable to get Starless, you get some really good attack speed option. And it's good. It's 50% damage now. It's and it doesn't have the annoyingness of like needing to weave in alternating skill casts and like have to run teleport and chant to stack it up. But Enlightenment got a slight nerf because they didn't really like that we had permanent uptime on it, but it's still going to be permanent. Don't worry about it. It's still 175 to, it's still 75% to 100% damage. It's still very good. The charges gained from alternating element casts went from 15 to 8. So in the past, say you casted Fireball, then you teleported, then you casted Fireball again. That was like 30 stacks. Now it's going to be 16. It's not a big deal. Mainly for Frost and Fire builds that are running Teleport and Chant. And then Shock builds can get away with it too because they have a lot of Ice Blade spam. So that's why Ice Blade Enchant and the reducing cooldowns is so important. It's because you got to be weaving all these different skills. All right. Paragon changes were huge, Rochester, huge. The Tactician glyph was buffed from 10 to 15%. Pretty big. The Adept glyph, the additive amount was bumped up. It now is a 3% base instead of 2%. What that equates to is the additive goes from, you get about 350 now, it's going to go about 525. In the grand scheme of things, if you're using Enlightenment, it's about 4% damage when it's active, 6% when it's not. So 5% damage, and the Mastery area bonus went from 20 to 30%. That's large. The Electrocute glyph, the crit chance bonus, which is only to crowd control enemies, went from 5 to 15%. Still terrible. Crit chance isn't. Perdition exists. You get like 60, you get 49, 60% crit chance from that. So it's whatever. Static Surge got buffed. So this is really good for shock builds. Went from 40 to 50% damage, 7% more damage. And, 7% doesn't sound like a lot, but when you go back and you have like the changes to permafrost, the little buff to inner flames, it's just they start to add up. They start to compound. 7% here, 12% here, 18% here, 10% here. It starts to, and so that's what I think Sorc's going to be dealing at least double damage next season. Some builds maybe a little bit more. There's just a lot of really good stuff. And then, here, another 15%. Fundamental release went from 30 to 50%. The math works out to 15% more damage to all builds. So that's amazing. Enchantment Master, the enchantment bonus went from 20 to 30%. So previously, if you had Frozen Orb enchant, it was a 30% chance at base to cast a Frozen Orb when you're casting a skill. And then with Enchantment Master, it went to 36%, and now it's going to go to 39%. But because of the changes, too, that we're seeing now that I'm going to get to with Searing Heat, Icefall, all the changes to Static Surge, Ceaseless Conduit, Enchantment Master will not be ran. It's only going to be used on dedicated speed farm setups with Teleport Enchantment if you really, really want to go fast. It's a great board. It has a lot of non-fizz. It's so good, but it's just tragic that it has to be given up because it's legendary. No, it isn't damage. Like, getting 30% more Frozen Orb and chance, it's just not damage. Do you know what I mean? And we move on to Searing Heat. So Searing Heat is retaining the 12% pyro crit chance that it has. That's its base. But now it's 60% all damage for direct damage. So the biggest kicker here is that Frost builds are going to run this now as their final board. They'll sort of avoid a lot of the rare nodes, but it's just 60% direct damage. It's great. In the PTR, we were really concerned with Ceaseless Conduit being all damage because we felt that every single Sorcerer build was going to be forced to make Crackling Energy, with Mystical Teleport, and then it was really cumbersome to retain the Crackling. You had to pick it up and then scurry away so it didn't bop on everyone, and it was going to be a really bad season if that was just the way that we had to play. But now they've made it so Frost builds can run Searing Heat as their extra damage glyph. It just kind of sucks. The board's a little useless for it, but 60% damage is a lot. And then Fire builds are going to be able to run Icefall because Icefall has retained the 25% increased Frost skill damage on the legendary node. But now, if the enemy is frozen or it's a boss, just a boss, not a crowd controlled boss, just a boss, it's 50% all damage. So this is a huge boon to every single Fire build because they will be running Icefall as their final board. And then Shock builds aren't really affected by Searing Heat and Icefall changes because they're going to run Starter, Frigid Fate, Fundamental Release, and then Ceaseless and Static. So, but these are great because running the Ceaseless Conduit Crackling Energy thing, it just wasn't it. So aspect and unique changes. So Splintering Aspect from the PTR, the damage unchanged, but it was bug fixed. So it got 70% more damage more later. The aspect range is now 60 to 100%. It's unchanged, but now it actually can get a bonus for being on an amulet and two-hander. It was just kind of in limbo before. The Frozen Memories aspect, which is the Avalanche aspect, where, Avalanche, you get one free cast. Right here, your Frost skills have a 30% chance. Make your next cast the Ice Shards, yada, yada. This is only viable for Ice Shards. Just the way that the meta shakes out, really. Because it doesn't work with Blizzard's Ice Spikes, and it doesn't work with Winterglass spawns. I digress. So, as of right now, you get 60% damage, and then you get another plus 25% against vulnerable enemies. So the way that works out is 60 plus 25. Right now you're getting 85%. But now when you use the new Frozen Memories aspect, you're going to get the 2 free casts, and it's going to increase the damage to vulnerable bonus to this 25% right here. It's going to go from 25 to 75%. So that's 60 plus 75 instead of 60 plus 25. That's 135% damage. And the way that maths out, 2.35 divided by 1.85. It's a 27% damage aspect. That's in line because it also has more utility because it gives you the 2 free casts as well so that you have really good uptime on Avalanche. It's very strong compared to, say, just like a flat up 35% damage aspect. Engulfing Flames, it went from 6 to 9% per rank. Not rank, it's an aspect. It went from 6 to 9% per second. Its max damage after 5 seconds is now 45%. So every second they remain burning, they'll take more and more and more burning damage until they hit 5 seconds at 45%. Encased Aspect, it got buffed. It's the aspect where during Deep Freeze, you heal and you regen mana. Its values got buffed up by like 50% or something. But the funny thing is, mana is either solved or not. The only time you would really use this is leveling. And then when you're leveling, you don't have good Deep Freeze uptimes. So it's like, I don't know. The idea is to use Deep Freeze. You're in a bind. You're out of mana. Use your Deep Freeze, heal and regen your mana, and then you're just going to cast 4 more times, and you're just going to be out of mana again. So it's like, whatever. Strike of Stormhorn, the Ball Lightning unique, not the gravitational one. The Super Ball Lightning damage bonus. Right here, Super Ball Lightnings are larger, and they deal 125% more damage. I got this from T4 builds. They may have jumped the gun a little bit there. Enchantment changes. I like the Firebolt enchant change, but it's still not enough. But, indirectly, Frost Nova enchant got buffed. But let's go down the line. So Firebolt enchant Burning damage has a 10% chance to heal, and it can now overheal. Straight off the top of my head, I don't know how that would affect too many things, but I digress. Maybe there's some things I can't think of that proc off like the act of being healed. So whatever, they can overheal. And now the big one is they unleash a firebolt. So this is a pretty actually big boon to burning builds, because glinting firebolt gives you 25% more burning damage to anything hit by a firebolt. And this used to not work with the enchant before, but now it will work with the enchant because it's going to spawn firebolts. And running firebolt on the skill bar was always very cumbersome in any fire build besides firebolt. Spark enchant went from a 14 to a 20% chance to make a crackling on kill. Still very mid. So the enchant meta is looking, in my opinion, it's either going to be your build will either run teleport and ice blade enchantment, or it will run ice blade and frost nova enchantment. I'm pretty dead set on this, because of the frost nova making enemies take 15% more damage, and then also the buffs to invoked ice blades, and just ice blades being amazing in general. There's such good synergy with these, because you're going to have 6 ice blades out, and they're all going to be chopping. And then frost nova enchant, your conjuration skills have a 35% chance to unleash a frost nova when hitting enemies. You get 6 ice blades. It's got this 35% lucky hit isn't too low either. It's pretty high. So you can have your ice blades just around chopping, and they're just going to be proccing frost novas all over the place. And if you really want, you can run Ice Heart Brace with it too. So I think it's cool, but a lot of builds, you're always going to want Ice Blade Enchant as the base realistically. And then if you want to go fast, you can, or stack up Enlightenment really fast, you can run Teleport Enchant, and then, Frost Nova. Basically the way that I'm saying in my builds is like, the build will either have Teleport and Ice Blade Enchant with Frost Nova on the bar, or it will have Ice Blade and Frost Nova Enchant with Teleport on the bar. Like Teleport and Frost Nova, you can just swap them on a whim depending on the content that you're playing and which one you like more. Always try and keep things open to people. So one of the biggest bug fixes was Splintering Aspect. It used to always use the additive amount, and now it scales using the bonus. And this is shown, say you have 1670 critical strike damage additive. That's what it was scaling off before. That's this aspect right here. Critical hits with Lightning Spear cause the spear to arc the damage to target and 5 other enemies. It's increased by 100% of your critical strike damage bonus. In the past, this bonus basically was never even working. It was just using the 1670, and now it's going to use this 2940 here, this much larger value. TLDR, previously, if it dealt 100 damage, it would scale by that much. 1670, it would go to 1773. Now it's going to scale by the 2900 value. It's going to go to 30, around 3000, and that's a 71% damage increase. So Lightning Spear got hit really hard when it got changed to actually scale off Spear's actual damage and not use the flat value, because the flat value just provided more damage than Lightning Spear, because Spear's skill percentage is so low at like 22.4 per 5 ranks. But this really offsets it, and I think Lightning Spear is going to be the strongest Sorcerer build, barring burning builds that are abusing Shatter and Greater Fireball, but nobody wants to play those. So like Splintering is going to be the strongest build. And there's also some really good gems. Just want to go over these real quick. Your summons deal 15% more direct damage to Hex Elites. You deal more damage per hex that you put on an enemy. You get more crit strike damage. That's not going to affect the bonus, but you get more crit strike damage when enemies are inside your aura. Everything inside the aura is made vulnerable. After casting an ult, your servants, minions, and companions. This worked with Hydra too. So I assume it works with Lightning Spear and stuff like that. They're going to be bigger and deal 45% more damage. It's really going to be a summon. Like Splintering is going to be a monster. Maybe 120, 125 pit. Could be being optimistic, but maybe 120 pit. All right, so Splintering aspect, it now scales off the spear's actual damage. So this chance for lightning spear to deal double damage. This should increase your splintering's damage because it's arcing the damage that the spear dealt instead of this. It's arcing the damage that the spear itself is dealing. So everything that buffs the spear's damage itself will get arced and applied to it, instead of in the past, splintering just created a proc when it crit that arced a flat damage to everything, and you scaled that flat damage. They were like two totally separate entities. Spear was just a vehicle. Now Spear is a vehicle, and then it enhances itself. So that's where I'm at with that. But Perdition is a better helmet than like a 8 rank lightning spear helmet, just because the 60% damage matches that, and it has crit chance. So it has 54% crit chance. So yeah, this is just better. But if you get a really good lightning spear helmet, you can totally use that with like concussive strikes, if you have a handle on your crit chance. And especially too, because when you see this like growing, your servants, minions, and companions have 100% crit chance while enlarged. So if they're always enlarged, like you could just run a concussive strikes helmet over Perdition, because you don't have to worry about crit anymore. You get a lot of damage from this. I don't think it's 60%, but whatever. Let's talk about the glyphs for it. So I don't like Invocation. Everyone gets suckered into it because they see this 500% crit strike damage, but it doesn't go into this tooltip, which is how splintering scales. It's conjuration critical strike damage. So it's not critical strike damage. It's like, shot crit chance and pyro crit chance. They don't go into the tooltip like this. Because they're like conditional on an element or a skill tag to occur. I think Conjurer is just the better glyph. And basically, I can't get, one of these becomes the odd man out. And I would take Conjurer over Invocation, because Conjurer is int based. So you get a lot more, you're not taking dex to fill it out. You're taking int. So the int is bolstering your damage. It has a higher raw value, 624 versus 527. It has the same conjuration damage, and the bonus is just better. Conjuration skills have 15% more crit chance. I know we're talking about crit, but we have so much crit, but still this conditional DR here just isn't it. I think the additional additive and the intelligence alone just make Conjurer take the cake over Invocation. And then last but not least, the Battlecasters. This thing honestly isn't as terrible as I thought. So say you have 5 ranks in Spear. If you go to 10 ranks, it's a 35% damage increase. So it's the same thing as like Shredding Blades, but it might just end up being the odd man out, where you might want Storm Swell or Shredding Blades in its place. You know what I mean? Because this thing needs a lucky hit. It's got to stack up, whatever. Winterglass, talk about Frozen Orb Jon Snow. So Winterglass still has Primordial Binding. They haven't changed it, and they did not give Frozen Orb the summon tag. So when you're using Winterglass, this is only buffing Spear and Lightning Spear. So Frozen Orb is essentially now, it's purely a vehicle to enhance, it's purely a vehicle and like a starter / mid-game build for Splintering to proc Spears, and then you run Splintering on the staff. But Primordial Binding itself is still really good on a lot of builds. I would still take 3 ranks in it in the skill tree because of the movement speed and the mana regen. It's still just, mana, you never say no to mana regen and movement speed. This is just great. And then CD bindings, don't use these. These are junk. This whole thing needs a rework. You don't get enough value out of, casting a familiar. It makes all 3, and it's just, no. And it's not worth it for the ranks. The Primordial Binding, you're better off just running Int Gloves with crit strike damage and a damage aspect. Bug fixes. So Okins and Stormhorn, both of them were dealing half damage in the PTR. The attack speed after defensive cast affix wasn't working apparently. We couldn't really tell because the tooltips were so scuffed in the PTR. So now it works. You can get this value really high, and I hope it's capped too, but I don't know as of now. That way we can get well above 100%. Okins is probably going to be the better focus after the bug fix to the attack speed, and after the bug fix to the damage. Like, it's probably, you're just going to deal more damage. I really liked Stormhorn a lot more. I liked how it played. The ball lightning splash is on contact. It's 125% now, and it was dealing half damage, so we'll see. But honestly, the way that you make the build, you can just swap Okins and Stormhorn on a whim. It doesn't matter. Stormhorn wasn't receiving its stun at max range. Who cares? So the Avalanche key passive for Ice Shards, the bonus to vulnerable, that extra 25%, which is now going to be 75%. It was only working for the initial target. So say Ice Shard pierced, it wasn't working. And then Enlightenment, the same way Splintering was using the additive, Enlightenment was only using the additive. So now it's going to use the non-physical damage bonus, which we don't have too many sources to increase our non-physical bonus. Whereas, like, a crit strike damage bonus will get inflated just by itself, just for being a crit, because that inherent 1.5x damage, it just balloons it from 16, balloons it by so much. But you still get some value out of this, mainly through the Elementalist Glyph gives 10.4%, and then Pyromaniac gives another however many percent, because it increases your fire damage. So it'll add up. And then, unfortunately, the glyphs that boost cold damage and lightning damage just aren't really used right now. Winter, frostbite, whatever. It's just not used right now. And then Inferno, the double damage temper wasn't working. So a dedicated Inferno spam build. It sucks to play, but it worked. I think I did 100 with it, and so you should be able to do way more if the double damage temper is working, especially with those new ultimate aspects. Combustion, they are keeping it as scaling off damage with burning. They noted it as a tooltip error, but I don't know. Anyways, so now it's going to work with Torch. It's going to work with probably that Incinerate aspect, and maybe even still Incinerate Enchant. We don't know yet. And this is sort of just for the memes, but big Hydra. So in the PTR, I casted a Hydra, and it was fucking massive. So I don't know. I'm going to have some fun with a Hydra build, but yeah, the builds I'm looking forward to most next season are not really looking forward to Splintering, but I'm curious to see how it plays. It's going to be very strong. I'm curious to see if Fireball's still bugged. I want to play the Meteorite build. I want to play Ice Shards. I want to play both of the Ball Lightning builds, and kind of want to play Hydra. So we'll see. But thanks for listening. I hope it was insightful. I'm optimistic for this season. I think the two biggest things that I saw that gave me a lot of hope, just for the future, just a lot of things, like the change for Mystical Frost Nova. It has value now, where it didn't have any value before. Now that it gives 15% more damage. Took long enough. They invoked Ice Blades, 10% attack speed for Ice Blade, applying to you and your Ice Blades. Great self buff. The Supreme Deep Freeze, the changes to Deep Freeze I really liked, and this one is what really sent it over the edge for me, the 25% damage for 5 seconds after it ends. That's great. The Inferno changes were crazy. These buffs to Permafrost, Inner Flames, they're just like, we have damage from so many different sources, and then all the multipliers are like very specific. So it ends up being very difficult to scale everything. Like, you end up having to just moonshot one single thing because you can't really bring it all up. But now the things are just being put in line more, just with different passives and different things buffing all fire damage or all damage, or different boards finally being able to be used on different skills, etc., different elements. This huge buff to Fundamental Release. It all started with Frigid Fate being 60% damage to all vulnerable, and it's been going pretty well. So I'm looking forward to this season. This is kind of my mood, and there we go. Have a good one, guys.